Audi's 2023 RS5 Sportback, and I think it is wonderfully understated in its design. But there's nothing about this car that is flashy or shouts about its performance, which on paper at least is very stout, and we're certainly going to explore some of that in the drive today. But overall I think the execution here is really good, and you know, if you wanted to drive something every day and not get into spats at every single stoplight with people, you know, trying to race you or vie for your attention, this certainly could be the ticket. So inside the 2023 RS5 Sportback, this is a very Audi-ish interior. Certainly the quilted seats emblazoned with the RS logo and the red stitching are pretty on brand for Audi's RS line of cars. And you know, overall the materials in here are of high quality. Everything falls easily to hand. You have actual buttons for the climate control, for your drive select programs, which allows you to toggle between auto, comfort, and dynamic modes. This car does have adjustable dampers. We'll be exploring that. There is this, you know, what appears to be a stuck-on tablet in the middle of the dashboard, and I think these are going to age terribly. I can't imagine what this is going to look like in 10 years, but I have a feeling it's going to be the equivalent of seeing somebody today driving around with a Garmin suction cup to their dashboard. But nonetheless, here it is. At least the controls are somewhat intuitive, and it is relatively responsive to the touch. So it is at least competent in that regard. Everything else here is pretty much standard fare. You do have some nice Alcantara on the doors, some carbon fiber trim around the cabin. But there's nothing here that really stands out, other than the fact that you have some wonderfully supportive seats, a fair bit of room in the back for rear passengers, and a good dollop of practicality behind those rear seats with the RS's rear hatchback. I know that's a four-letter word, but it's true. It is a hatchback. So let's take this for a drive and let's find out what it's all about. So I feel like the RS5 finds itself in a bit of a strange place. First, if we look at the competitive landscape for this car, its direct competitors would be things like the Alfa Romeo Giulia Quadrifoglio, the CT5 Blackwing Cadillac, and of course BMW M3 competition. The previous generation C63 AMG would also qualify, although the current car would not, for obvious reasons, with its deviation to a four-cylinder motor. But that's for another segment. So, you know, I think this car is appealing because it doesn't have the exuberance of something like an M3, where, you know, it's like, hey, look at me. And believe me, I'm a huge fan of the G80 M3 design. I think it's certainly, the front end has grown on me, even with those gigantic nostrils in the front. But it is a lot, and sometimes you want to have a little bit of anonymity as you're going down the road, and I think this car strikes that balance perfectly. And the real question is it a legitimate competitor? Can it deliver on its credentials? Which, you know, if we're to believe it, an RS badge affixed to an Audi should be something very special. Although I always thought that the RS really didn't get the recognition that it deserved. It certainly didn't get the same kind of publicity that something like BMW's Motorsport products or Mercedes AMG cars received from the press, and just sort of general admiration from the public. You know, when you talk about performance sedans, it's hard to do that without mentioning M3 or M5 or Mercedes AMG E63 or C63, but you rarely hear people talk about the Audi RS cars. So I would like to see if maybe this is something that's been wrongfully living under the radar for all these years. This car has a 2.9 liter twin turbo V6 making 440 horsepower. A little bit of a slide there through the corner, but very controllable. Well, there's no doubting that this car is really brutally fast, especially from a standstill. There's plenty of mid-range thrust as well. It doesn't have the same sonorous voice that something like an S58 would have, or even a bi-turbo V8 in the Mercedes AMG would have. So you're not buying this car for the sound of the motor, but it certainly is more than capable. And the transmission is really on point. Down changes are, you know, really quick. And the transmission seems to want to dance with, you know, the kind of moves that you want to throw at this car as you're hustling through a corner or a back road. It definitely seems very eager to play. Steering feel, it's okay, but it, you know, for what it lacks in steering feel, I feel like it makes up for in the deftness of the chassis and you know, the ability to feel what's happening underneath the car. And certainly as the car slid out in that corner, it was imminently controllable, and I didn't feel like the car wanted to bite me. So that's certainly confidence inspiring as you're, you know, trying to drive a car like this close to its limits or at its limits. And it's not something that's always successfully done in a lot of new cars. They just don't inspire confidence. So props to Audi for getting that right. The brake feel in this car is excellent. It really, really is just right there. And the real question is, would you choose this over an M3 competition, a CT5 Blackwing, or a Giulia Quadrifoglio? I haven't driven the CT5 Blackwing, can't comment on that. I have driven the Giulia Quad, I have driven the M3 Comp, and I've driven the M3 Comp on a racetrack as well. It's, you know, I feel like those cars have, it's a hard thing to describe because you can't put it on paper, but there is an emotional response in the way those cars go down the road that is lacking in this RS5. This car is excellent, but it's excellent in a clinical way. There isn't a whole lot of passion behind how this car goes about its business, and I think that was probably intentional. Audis have never been about the passion, but they've been about, certainly in their illustrious history in motorsports, it's been about getting results, and they've achieved that through engineering prowess. And certainly this car does not lack engineering prowess, but it does lack that lust factor. I'm not sitting here saying, man, I really, really, really got to have an RS5 in the same way that I'm lusting after something like an M3 Comp or even a Giulia Quadrifoglio, which just feels that extra bit more special. Again, it is fast. So I'm not knocking this car's performance, and I think for the type of person, again, that's seeking the anonymity of driving something that makes less of a statement than an M3 or an AMG, this is probably the perfect answer. But for me personally, I just feel like it's a little bit soulless. It's a little bit lacking in charisma, and I would probably go with one of the other choices. Hope you enjoyed it. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. Keep watching. Keep subscribing. See you for the next one.